BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. And in this episode, we will be going deep into the 1974 letters, and I will also be sharing the most far-out Zodiac Killer video that I have ever found. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, there is a video that was released on the Nancy Drew channel as part of the Unsolved series, and that is a channel that talks a lot about the Zodiac Killer, but also a lot about other cases, such as the story of JonBenet Ramsey. And to be clear, this is not the most far-out Zodiac Killer video that I have ever found. That one will appear later in the episode, so please stay tuned. Instead, this is one that actually wasn't so bad. I have been staying away from the Nancy Drew channel over the last several months because sometimes I just can't understand what angle the host is coming from, whether he's trying to argue in favor of a point, or he's playing devil's advocate, or just sharing a possibility. And one thing that I like to do on Black Box Online Radio is I want to be very clear that this is a theory that I think is viable, or this is just a theory that someone else has proposed and I want to challenge. Or sometimes you can say that this is an observation that I do indeed support, and this is an observation that I am exploring for the sake of discussion, and I'm trying to actually show some problems with the reasoning. I think it's very important to differentiate what someone actually believes and when they're just playing the field and looking at other possibilities. But this video really wasn't so bad. It started out by talking about the connections among Arthur Leigh Allen, Sandy Panzarella, and Ron Allen and Don Chaney. So these four people who have been at the center point of a lot of discussions, and I know that the listeners of this program think very highly of the theory that involves Don Chaney as the Zodiac Killer, or some possible combination of the people that I just mentioned: Arthur Leigh Allen, Don Chaney, Sandy Panzarella, and Ron Allen. And at first, I know that this is a little bit off topic, but he began by sharing this photo of Arthur Leigh Allen back from his diving days, and it's something that I can't get over. When Arthur Leigh Allen was younger, he looked like a normal, non-threatening person. By the time he got into his older years, he really did come across as somebody who was intimidating. He came across as somewhat threatening, dangerous, the type of person you would not want to leave your kids around, that should go without saying. But during his younger years, he definitely looked more normal and non-threatening. Arthur Leigh Allen was a very accomplished diver, and he could also do a fair amount of gymnastics and trampoline tricks. But that's just a photo that they shared, and because of his diving, he also wore a Zodiac Seawolf watch. Very good for skin diving. But what this video wanted to propose was, could Arthur Leigh Allen have been the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates? Arthur Leigh Allen could have gone down to Riverside, California, where Sherry Jo Bates was murdered on October 30th of 1966, committed the Bates murder, saying that he was going to be there for a race or some type of excuse, or just taking the day off work. Then he goes back up to Northern California, to Vallejo. Then he goes back down to Southern California to go to Pomona, where his brother Ron lived, because Arthur Leigh Allen was going to attend a wedding 1 month later. 1 month after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates comes the Riverside Confession, the letter which took credit for the Bates murder. And this is not an original observation from the Nancy Drew channel. This is not like a brilliant discovery. This is organizing info into a succinct presentation, and he did a very good job of that. And it could also work in a different way, because I know Jerome from Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, aka the French Wrecking Crew, has also explored the exact opposite of this theory, that there could have been some involvement with Sandy Panzarella, Don Chaney, and Ron Allen, that these three people were involved with the murders, and they used Arthur Leigh Allen as somebody to frame, almost like a patsy. So this could have gone in two completely different directions, and the interpretations of the evidence are almost equally defendable. because you have the same people in the same locations. The video continued by sharing some comparisons between letters that Arthur Leigh Allen had written on a typewriter and the Riverside Confession, and the host was asking the audience, do you think that these letters look the same? And this is also not a giant discovery. Arthur Leigh Allen had the same type of typewriter, a royal typewriter, that was used to write the confession, and I'm really not impressed by any type of typefaces matching up. I mean, even if it wasn't the same type of typewriter, it probably would look very similar. And, I mean, this is not handwriting. These are not handwriting examples. This is the keys from a typewriter. Does it make the same printed letters? Yes, of course, they look very similar, but this is also not some, big revelation. Arthur Leigh Allen had the same type of typewriter. But I would just like to ask you guys, is he your suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery? And I would also like to give a big thank you to everyone who listened to the bonus episode that came out last Thursday here on Black Box Online Radio, where I was talking about the Zodiac Killer suspect Peter Plante and the book Titwillow. It's a book that I've mentioned before on Zodiac Monday, but I decided to make a standalone episode for it to give the book another chance and also to truly explore Peter Plante as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And Peter Plante was the suspect of his late wife, Judith Chapman. After he passed away, she wrote this book and believed that he was the Zodiac Killer. And if you did not hear that episode, I'm going to give you the nutshell version, the very basic rundown, because it's going to tie in to some very important discussions on the Zodiac Killer's letters. And that is that I think that her only strong pieces of evidence related to the 1974 letters. Her book is called Titwillow, and Titwillow is from the 1974 Exorcist letter. He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave, Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow. Although Titwillow is misspelled in the letters, but I digress from that. And I think that we can arrange the information into some very simple possibilities. But first, the only real strong points that I found from Judith Chapman were that she had some stories about her late husband, Peter Plante, that were connected to the Zodiac Killer's letters. Not the murders, but the letters. For example, in the 1974 Exorcist letter, it says, I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy ever. And P.S., signed yours truly, P.S. if I don't see this note in the paper, I'll do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. And then there's that quote from the Mikado again. He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow. There are also some Japanese-style markings on the Exorcist letter. And she claims that her husband, late husband Peter Plante, told her this exact sentence. He referred to the movie The Exorcist as a satirical comedy. Okay, so that is a strong point, right? And there's another letter that was written in 1974 that may have been from the Zodiac Killer called the Badlands Letter or the Citizen Card. And it discusses the movie Badlands, and it calls out the glorification of violence and says that it's unjustifiable. And it's signed a citizen. Both of the communications that I just talked about do not have the name Zodiac in them, nor do the other two 1974 letters, the SLA letter and the Count Marco letter. And Judith Chapman says that there is not one, not two, but there are three people who can verify that her late husband, Peter Plante, wrote a letter to the editor about the movie Badlands and signed it a citizen. And I'm like, well, that's also another strong point. So I'm going to arrange her Zodiac observations into three different possibilities. Like, what's the conclusion? I'm going to give you three different possibilities. You know what? Let's make it four possibilities to make it interesting. That also will tie in very neatly to choice A, B, C, or D. And the first choice, option A, her late husband was the Zodiac Killer, and his name was Peter Plante. He was a criminal justice major from San Jose State University. At the time of the Zodiac murders, he was 20 years old at the time of the crimes. And he was the Zodiac. That's option A. Option B would be that he was a hoaxer, that he actually hoaxed the 1974 letters. To all the people out there who think that the 1974 Exorcist letter was a hoax, this guy could be your man. And also, if you think that all of the 74 letters and the 78 letter was a hoax, this guy could be your man, because, again, the only real pieces of evidence come from linguistic similarities that his widow recalls him using, as well as directly remembering him writing these letters, or at least one of the letters. And furthermore, he was married in 1978 when the Zodiac letter reemerged, especially to those who believe that there is indeed a DNA link between the Exorcist letter and the 78 letter. This guy could be your man. Option A, he was the Zodiac. Option B, he was a Zodiac hoaxer. Option C, and this is something that I really wish I had included in the Peter Plante episode, so I'm doing a follow-up here, and that is that he was someone who was a Zodiac fanboy. I don't mean an armchair sleuth, I don't mean an armchair detective, I don't mean a person who was trying to solve the case, I mean a genuine Zodiac fanboy. I just told you he was a criminal justice major at San Jose State University. Would he not be the type of person who would follow the Zodiac letters in the newspaper? Would he not have been paying close attention to the Zodiac stories in 1968 and 69? Specifically 1969, because that's when the Zodiac Killer debuted, and he shared the name Zodiac to the world, and then the letters go into 1970, 1971. We have the halt in Zodiac activity for 72 and 73, and then there's this giant news story in 1974 that the Zodiac has resurfaced. And a lot of you might be wondering, well, what on earth was going on in 1974 with the media? I mean, was this stuff reported on in the media? Is this something that he could have learned about from the newspapers? Well, I will just ask you guys, when was the Exorcist letter written? When did this come about? And the answer is January of 1974. When was this news shared in the paper? Also January of 1974. And when did Peter Plante first get introduced to his wife, Judith Chapman? Also 1974. Going from her timeline, she was 15 when she met him, and he was actually a family friend for 4 years. Then they got married in 1978, 4 years after they met, and they started dating romantically in February of 1978, but they met in 1974. But again, the Exorcist letter was almost immediately reported in the paper, as evidenced by this article that was written and published on Thursday, January 31st of 1974. And that says, Zodiac writes anew of movie, murders. And this is actually from the Sacramento Bee, but it is an Associated Press article, and this news was almost certainly shared in the Bay Area, and it's quite possible that somebody who was a student from San Jose State University would have also been reading about this. But let's just go through this article here. Zodiac writes anew of movie, San Francisco. After nearly a 3-year silence, the Zodiac Killer has written another of his cryptic hand-printed letters, claiming responsibility for a long string of murders. In the last missive received Wednesday by the San Francisco Chronicle, the author has claimed 37 kills this time, since 1966. The badly misspelled note, scrawled with a blue felt tip pen, also quotes Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta, The Mikado, and reviews the current film, The Exorcist. And you might be wondering, okay, but she said, not that, the Zodiac wrote a letter about The Exorcist, she remembered him saying that The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy ever. Was the text of the Exorcist letter posted in the paper? Absolutely. And this is the direct quotation from the news article that went out on January 31st of 1974. I saw and think that The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. The letter opened, sign yours truly. It continued then, quoting a verse from Coco's Titwillow song in the second act of The Mikado. P.S. If I don't see this note in your paper, I will do something nasty which you know I'm capable of. Me 37 SFPD 0. So, that direct quotation about saying that The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy went out in the newspaper in 1974 almost immediately after this letter was sent, mailed, and received by by everybody. So, that wouldn't necessarily be any type of insider information that would truly indicate that this person was the Zodiac Killer. And as for writing the letter Badlands that ends in a citizen, all right, we have 3 options now. Option A, he was the Zodiac. Option B, he was a hoaxer who wrote these letters. And option C is he was a Zodiac fanboy who read about this stuff in the papers and then just started talking about it. And then there is the fourth one. As I said, we should add in a fourth. Option D, and that is that this is a series of false memories that somebody is having. When somebody is hearing these types of clues. They're hearing these words from the Exorcist letter and from the Badlands letter, and they're thinking, "Oh wait, I remember. I know. He wrote that. He said that to me. He told me those things." And those events may not have actually happened, but when people are thinking backwards, sometimes they connect the dots in impractical ways. This happens time and time again, and people do this. I mean, you do this in your personal life. Sometimes you think that something actually happened, but something has been misquoted. Maybe he said something about The Exorcist, but it wasn't actually the word satirical comedy. Maybe he did talk about the movie Badlands, but he didn't write the letter and sign it a citizen. Maybe he even wrote a letter about the Badlands, but he didn't sign it a citizen. These details are extremely precise, and I almost think that they are so precise that somebody might be misremembering things. But which option do you agree with? A, B, C, or D? And I have to play the skeptical card, and I have to go with option D. And that was my gut instinct from the beginning. For a brief time, I began to think that, if somebody actually does think that this guy hoaxed the Exorcist letter, that when the Badlands card, the S.L. Leigh letter, the Count Marco letter, the 78 letter, then Peter Plante might actually be a good suspect for hoaxing the letters. But as of now, I think that the Exorcist letter is authentic. It has Zodiac verbiage, it has similar handwriting, it talks about similar themes, plus there's the scorecard at the end, 37 and 0 with the increasing scorecard. And even though it doesn't say this is the Zodiac speaking, if this were a hoax letter, you would almost think that it would say this is the Zodiac speaking. But it seems like that one is from the killer. And then all of the other letters from 1974 tie in very neatly and nicely to this reinvention of the Zodiac, about how the Zodiac may have been trying to just start writing letters in a different way. Maybe at one point he was even thinking about using the name Red Phantom, which was used in the Count Marco letter, and then he changed his mind, or something else happened. But the letters from 1974 do not begin with "This is the Zodiac speaking." And in addition to my episode on Peter Plante as a Zodiac Killer suspect, as well as all of these clues in the 1974 letters, I also issued a challenge question on the Black Box Online Radio post page, which is just part of the YouTube channel here. You might see it in your newsfeed. Do you think that the Badlands letter was authentic? And this is one that came in on the episode. This is from Druzer, who says, "Hey Ned, the police consider all of the letters from 1974 authentic, even if some of us do not. I'm suspicious of 2 of them, but technically all 4 are canon and legally admissible. And that does not surprise me at all. There are an enormous amount of disputes among Zodiac Killer researchers. I mean, mostly it comes down to people believe that the Exorcist letter is authentic, and then the SLA letter, Badlands letter, and Count Marco letter are questionable. But, I mean, this doesn't surprise me at all that law enforcement would accept that these are authentic, because they have so many similarities, they're similar ideas. Even if the handwriting isn't exact on all of them, there could be very simple explanations for this. And then we also have a thinking about letters, we have a comment from C.G. Karras, who says, "Good reporting. Richard Grinnell once looked at the Exorcist letter as a possible forgery by members of the SLA. If it is a forgery, it's a very good one. If you apply Gematria code, Titwillow times 3, you will get 666. This suspect might have been responsible for a couple of letters, but he was busy doing other things at the time of the canonical crimes. Just my opinion." And that is referring to Peter Plante as a Zodiac suspect. Yes, he was a gymnast at San Jose State University, and he also had to follow a dietary and strength training regimen and keep his weight at an exact 165 pounds. I think that he is a little bit too small to have been the Zodiac Killer, but that's just my take on the subject. Our next comment comes to us from TKBX, who says, "Is there a connection between the suspects? Maybe it was a secret killing club." Well, if you're going to have multiple letter writers and multiple killers, then absolutely it's going to make things more difficult and more confusing. That could also explain some differences with the handwriting of the unconfirmed communications, why they seem a little bit similar, but why they seem a little bit different. Now, is there a connection among the suspects? Absolutely, there are connections among the suspects. For example, I talked to you about Don Chaney and Arthur Leigh Allen at the beginning of the episode. They are both Zodiac Killer suspects who knew each other, plus a group murder theory involving the mentioned individuals. And I just mentioned C.G. Karras. He's the author of the book, The Zodiac, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes. That looks at a four-person group of Lawrence Kane, Xenophon Anthony, George Caradanis, and Hugh Penn. So there are these types of Zodiac Killer group theories that have Zodiac Killer suspects with established connections among them. But yes, good question. And I would also like to look at some more of the comments that came in on my polling question about whether or not you think the Badlands letter was authentic, because overall, I found that people were very, very divided. For example, we had a lot of people just saying yes, and Christopher Valdez says probably not. Then we have Justice Talks True Crime, who says, I believe that the Zodiac wrote this, and it had nothing to do with the Zodiac persona. It was just a lucky catch by the San Francisco Chronicle. I think it reveals a side of himself that he would present to the outside world. Well, I'm going to give this a response that is very basic. And Justice Talks True Crime, you might not exactly accept this, but, I mean, there's some very similar handwriting, and I would really have to closely analyze the envelope from the Badlands letter before I could confirm or deny your statement. But both Michael Cole and Mike Rodelli have talked about this angle, and that is that the Badlands letter might be the truest example of the Zodiac's real personality. When you look at how he's structuring the sentence and using punctuation to share the ideas, partnered with the advanced vocabulary and linguistic structures, this looks like somebody who was well educated and was familiar with writing, familiar with formal types of writing, academic types of writing, somebody who at the very least had been through a university education. And that's just my take on the subject. So a lot of people think the Zodiac Killer was uneducated and he was just a very well-read person. I'm not one of them, though. I think he would have had a bachelor's degree. But I'm going to continue with your comments and questions here. We have one from Pistis Adolphus who says, no, the Badlands letter is not authentic. After the debut of the Zodiac letter, he became obsessed with his own image that he created. The only way this could be the Zodiac is if he was old and delusional and completely forgot about his old self being Zodiac, which makes no sense given the letter was sent in 74. The Zodiac was too self-absorbed not to mention himself. This is probably just a citizen. Thinking this is the Zodiac is the same line of thinking that people get when they say that their uncle was the Zodiac. Just random speculation and dot connecting. Things that probably aren't really there, just desperately reaching for patterns. Well, I don't know about desperately reaching for patterns. Very similar handwriting on the Badlands letter. And also, if we look at the Exorcist letter and the Badlands letter together, both of these contain movie references. They don't begin with "this is the Zodiac speaking," but they're things that are meant to get somebody's attention, and you can also entertain the theory that the Exorcist letter was written to end the Zodiac Killer persona. That's why it talks about suicide. Then the next three letters are still making taunts and commands, but they're talking about it in different ways. Even the Count Marco letter, put Marco back in the hellhole. He's making a command and a taunt, and he's still being very arrogant and bossy, so there are some challenges there. Next we have Riverman, who says, yes, I think the Badlands letter is authentic. Evidently, Arthur Leigh Allen's Zodiac handwriting characteristics and tenor. He wrote this as himself after he retired the Zodiac alter ego. Exorcist letter was Arthur Leigh Allen's Zodiac over and out. Well, I mean, you could even take Arthur Leigh Allen out of that equation. Just say the Exorcist letter was the over and out. All right, now I'm still going to write taunting letters, but I'm going to do it in a very different way. But that would just beg the question, why? Why would a serial killer switch from ending the Zodiac persona to just trolling? And then, if your suspect is Peter Plante, resurface in 1978. And then we have another comment, though, that has come in here from Silver Stuff that says, I think it's the same handwriting. I don't think a copier would include the subtle stuff. I mean, very similar handwriting on the Badlands card, and that's what I was going with. I'm about 90% on the Badlands letter being actually from the killer, but there's still a 10% possibility that it is just similar handwriting or it is a blatant forgery. Maybe it was written by the suspect Peter Plante. Well, I would love to know what you think. And as you heard, these are comments that were shared by the listeners of Black Box Online Radio. If you have something to say about anything that was mentioned so far, drop your idea in the comment section down below. And also, I've noticed that the majority of people who have listened to this program and the other shows here on BBO War have not subscribed yet. You can always hit the subscribe button. It is free. And if we're going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer letters, I've been going through Michael Butterfield's book, The Zodiac Killer, The Story of America's Most Elusive Murderer. And this book has a section on the paper that was used to write the Zodiac letters. And I should say that it's discussed on one page as opposed to a section. But frequently on Black Box Online Radio, I've said that the Zodiac wrote on monarch-sized stationery, which was purchased from Woolworths, and it was under the brand of Fifth Avenue. What Michael Butterfield's book states is the brand of the Zodiac's paper was actually Eaton Stationery. That was the brand name. And I was wondering, why did I remember Fifth Avenue? And I just Googled the Eaton Company, and they had their head office store on Fifth Avenue in New York City. So perhaps that's how and why I misremembered that, but I don't want to make any major errors. And when we talk about monarch-sized stationery, we are talking about stationery that would be 7.25 inches by 10.5 inches, monarch-sized. And this is considerably smaller than what you would think about with like A4 paper, printer paper that we use in the present day. And a lot of people are keen to note this. Maybe you've seen this in a Zodiac Killer documentary where they're either holding up a replica or maybe the authentic letter, but they look so much smaller than perhaps we would imagine them because, I mean, somebody like me is used to looking at A4 printer paper, but I think that I can answer some questions about why the Zodiac Killer would choose to use this type of paper. And one person, Mike Rodelli, author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, has a suspect named Shel Cavale, who did indeed write on monarch-sized stationery, and he states that it was something that was commonly used in upper-class situations, and that this would be the type of stationery that was used by prominent individuals. So why is the Zodiac Killer writing on monarch-sized stationery? Now, I certainly didn't grow up in some type of upper-class home back in West Virginia, but I was born in 1988. And for a long time, we did not have internet in the house. We grew up as the last generation before the internet. And it was totally normal to have a stationery set in your house for handwritten messages. And that's what I think the heart and soul of this is. The Zodiac probably went to a Woolworth store. He bought some stationery because that's exactly what it's for. Hand-printed messages, and he wanted to use a specific kind just so if he's going all over the map, then that would create more possibilities for the authorities to trace it back to him, and maybe he actually wanted it to be high-quality paper because he thought that this is something that is important to him. He's trying to create this serial killer persona, but I think that it's so much simpler than that. It's just that what type of paper would he have used to write a handwritten message that's communicating a message that is going to be shared to people without any type of typewriter? Well, he wrote it on stationery paper. Again, we just kept this stuff in our house for that exact same reason. Of course, right now people are going to do things like emailing, sometimes even text messaging. Sometimes your boss will even message you on Facebook or a different form of social media. But back in the day, it was totally normal to have a stationery set in the house, no matter what part of the social class you were from. So that's something that I just want to pay attention to, and I do apologize if I've misstated the Zodiac's brand of stationery. And I would like to move on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report. And I'm giving a shout out to Troy Larson, who authored an article for Medium.com called, "Is This the Zodiac Killer? AI Says It Is." And Troy has been the source of the thumbnail for this episode, and this is another example of AI trying to bring the Zodiac Killer composite sketches to life and using them to get maybe a more artistic depiction of what the Zodiac Killer may have looked like. And I'm going to read something from the article right here. And again, Troy says, I quickly discovered some of the eyewitness descriptions didn't include an estimate for the Zodiac's age. All right, let's keep going. In other cases, I realized that while AI was able to generate some likeness and plausibly could be the Zodiac Killer in the image, the descriptions were based on very vague statements, and I just didn't feel really great about most of them. I decided to try something different. Instead of prompting the AI with a description of the killer listed by attribute, height, weight, and clothing, I decided to just let the AI do the work. The Zodiac Killer, based on eyewitness descriptions from the Paul Stein crime scene. I admit I was a bit stunned to see those renderings pop up, because they immediately felt creepy. And right, that's the way it's written. According to the eyewitness descriptions, near the Paul Stein murder, the Zodiac was white, 35 to 45 years old, and between 180 and 200 pounds. And firstly, I totally accept that these are some very creepy looking images. If you're listening to this program on Spotify or Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime, I hope that you'll check out the YouTube version to look at the images, but really, they are creepy indeed. However, what do you guys make of this description of the Zodiac after the murder of Paul Stein? 5 feet 10 inches tall, 35 to 45, 180 to 200 pounds. I think it's really odd that he would use the description of the Zodiac's height and weight from Officer Donald Falk, who allegedly saw the Zodiac and talked to the Zodiac, but not use the description from the Robbins kids, who were the sources for the sketch. They estimated that the Zodiac was 2 inches shorter, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, as opposed to 5 foot 10, although they were farther away, so maybe that's why they thought he was smaller. Fair enough, fair enough. But can I just talk to you guys about something and be very real for a second? I'm tired of talking about Donald Falk and his observations. I'm tired of dealing with his inconsistencies. He is a member of law enforcement who reportedly saw the Zodiac Killer on the night of his final crime, yet he has done so much disservice to this case. He has also been horribly inconsistent with his witness description, with his story. Did he talk to the Zodiac? Did he just drive right past him? All of this stuff is just a giant mess, and for us to sort things out is almost completely impractical, and I blame him for most of it. I just think that this is very, very disappointing, and we can just keep trying to wonder what was Donald Falk thinking when he was withholding information, when he's changing his story and telling one person one thing and telling another person another thing. I just think it's downright pathetic, if I can be very honest. But I would love to know what you guys think. You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. What do you think about Officer Falk's role in the Zodiac Killer mystery? And also, I'm very curious to know what you guys think about the 1974 letters, specifically the Exorcist letter and the Badlands letter, which I've been discussing in this episode. And you can always give me the most plausible option you think from my A, B, C, and D setup about Peter Plante as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackboxNed88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 says, Zodiac Monday is like my very own personal Popeye spinach. Hey, Batman66, thank you so much for that, and I am glad that you appreciate Zodiac Monday. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter. Thank you so much for everything. And of course, we also have CZ Guy. It wouldn't be complete without you three guys, very regular and consistent supporters. It means a lot to me. You have no idea how much. And we have another person on BuyMeACoffee.com, Classic Chevy Cat, who says, I was listening to Nancy Drew's channel, and he stated that Lawrence Kane, the Zodiac Killer suspect, was 5 feet 10 inches tall. Then I thought to myself, am I going crazy? I thought he was much shorter than that. I've got to go back and listen to your shows on Lawrence Kane, because I can't even recall why he became one of the top suspects. Yeah, I'm losing it. Ha ha ha. No, you're not losing it, Classic Chevy Cat. That is a very high estimate for Lawrence Kane's height. And, again, this might be a little bit of guesswork on my part, but some men exaggerate their height, they misrepresent their height. Some men blatantly lie about how tall they are. And this is not good. I mean, this is a bad thing, but this does happen. And with Lawrence Kane, I was told once that he was 5 feet 6 inches tall. That's the smallest I've ever heard. I was also told, as you just said, that he was 5 feet 10 inches tall. That is also something that has been discussed. But one thing that I noticed was there is a mugshot of Lawrence Kane, or at the very least, a photo of him from the 1940s, where he is behind a height meter, and it looks like that he is 5 feet 9 inches tall to the top of his hair, and he had that big, bushy, brown, New York style hair. And I mean, if we're talking 5'9" with his hair, that probably means that Lawrence Kane was realistically about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and the puffs of his hair went up to 5'9". That's my take on the subject, and as he got older, he probably would appear a little bit smaller due to curvature of the spine. Just what I think. If you guys have anything different, please put your ideas in the comment section down below, and I would love to know, what do you think about Lawrence Kane as a Zodiac Killer suspect? And as Classic Chevy Cat pointed out, I do have multiple episodes about him, and I would recommend the one called Lawrence Kane Criminal History, which heavily relies on the material from the Lawrence Kane WordPress, but it is an old-fashioned black box recording. And speaking of the content here on this channel, I've told you guys for a couple weeks that I've been planning on launching a series about the Black Dahlia, and that will come out on Thursday this week. Thank you so much to everyone who's been following along with the Zodiac Killer bonus episodes. I did some bonus Zodiac Killer news reports. I also wanted to make standalone episodes on suspects that didn't have them on the channel, such as Paul Doerr and Chester Klingel, and Peter Plante, who I discussed. He's the subject of the book Titwillow. But I've been talking about launching the Black Dahlia series here on BBO War. To all of those of you who are curious about this case, please tune in on Thursday for the new series, and it's going to be from the ground up, because I have done a handful of Black Dahlia episodes over the last 8 years here on BBO War, but I mean just that, probably under 5. So I'm definitely looking at doing something very, very expansive, and it will cover all different directions, looking at theories, looking at suspects, and there will probably be a lot about George Hill Hodel, who is also a Zodiac Killer suspect, maybe the most famous suspect in the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. Of course, he will have a lot to do with this series, because I'm just going to be telling my story and my research process, my investigative journey, which is mostly what Black Box Online Radio is all about. And on Tuesdays, there is a segment that comes out about the case of JonBenet Ramsey, and there will be a new episode coming out tomorrow. Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, Cooper Friday, and look out for these bonus episodes on JonBenet Ramsey and the Black Dahlia. And I would like to give a shout out to Dennis G., who has been helping find a lot of the images that are used for this program, and the ones that you see going by on the screen. Most of them come from Dennis G. I thank him so much for his help. And the images are now archived on a Facebook page called True Crime Designs. Now, to be clear, I do not run that page. It's run by somebody else, but they wanted to do this for the show. True Crime Designs is a place where you can look at all of these different images that you're seeing going by on Black Box Online Radio, and if you're just a close true crime follower, I invite you to check out True Crime Designs on Facebook. And in addition, this episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and the author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, please be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping Michael out by leaving a 5-star review. And I would like to give a shout out to Alan Jensen, who sent this in to the email address blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and Alan informed me about a collection of poetry that was written in 1976 by an individual named James Lafayette Dickey, and this is just the quick description. James Dickey is the author of poetry and a collection called The Zodiac. The collection is inspired by the poem The Zodiac by Dutch poet H. Marsman. Dickey was born in 1923, and he's a well-known American poet, novelist, and critic. He is perhaps most famous for his novel, Deliverance. And it also appears that the book cover for Deliverance resembles the Peek Through the Pines card to a certain extent, but Allen even admits that that is most likely a coincidence. However, Allen has made a lot of observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery, which I look forward to going through for a future episode of Zodiac Monday, and once again that came into the email address blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And in terms of work that is Zodiac related, there is a novel that came out for the year 2025 called Zodiac Resurrected, The Eternal Trial, and this was written by Angelita Estrella. This one is available on Amazon.com, and this is a chilling fusion of psychological horror and futuristic suspense. What if the Zodiac Killer never truly died? What if his legacy wasn't just murder, but a mind virus engineered to outlive time itself? In Zodiac Resurrected, The Eternal Trial, a dystopian future collides with a haunted past. Through revolutionary technology, humanity now masters memory implantation and cloning tools used to bring back the most notorious killer of the 20th century for a cognitive trial. The goal: to understand his crimes and prevent future horrors. But what begins as a psychological investigation spirals into a far more sinister discovery as the centuries go by, spanning conspiracies designed by the Zodiac himself. His clone isn't just a reconstruction, it's a weapon, and the real crime is only the beginning. As the trial unfolds, the line between reality and memory blurs. The clone Zodiac harbors secrets, even the original, never revealed. Flashbacks to an unknown childhood and undetected killings interweave a high-stakes war in the future, where minds are the battlefield and the identity is a fragile construct. One more time, that is the Zodiac Resurrected, The Eternal Trial by Angelita Estrella. I would like to ask you guys, what do you think about writers using the Zodiac Killer as a fictional character? Do you think that this is an ethical thing to do? Because clearly that's a novel, and Angelita Estrella is not trying to deceive anybody or make you think that that's a real true crime theory. She wrote that as a novel, but it's about the Zodiac Killer used in a very sci-fi style context. Do you think that this is an appropriate thing to do or not? Overall, I have to be on the side of free speech and free expression because I think a lot of it comes from my time doing Ripper Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio talking about Jack the Ripper. There are so many fictional stories that have been written about Jack the Ripper. Their fictional stories are meant to be taken seriously, where they're actually trying to recreate the thought process of the Ripper, most notably I, Ripper by Stephen Hunter, but I've also talked about paranormal ones, such as Ripper by Dean B. Cloud, and I can't even tell you how many Jack the Ripper novels have been written. So if I accept people writing novels about Jack the Ripper in different contexts, I should also accept them writing novels about the Zodiac Killer. But the way that I think of it is this. People write fiction about World War II and real historical figures, the Vietnam War, the First World War, and these are dealing with very, very tragic incidents. We're talking about the slaughter of real people, and they have completely fictionalized characters and fictionalized scenarios involving real people who were real historical characters at some times, and it's not meant to be done in a disrespectful context. It's meant to be done in terms of historical fiction, fiction that is about history. I think that the only difference among the stories that I've talked about, whether it's like say the First World War or Jack the Ripper, is there actually is a much higher chance that the Zodiac Killer mystery can be solved compared to that of Jack the Ripper, and also the direct relatives of the victims are still alive, many of them are anyway, and they might not take too kindly to a story about the Zodiac Killer. So I think that fiction can be written about the Zodiac if it's done, with genuine intent, and it's not trying to mistreat the victims or make them look bad or share unnecessarily gratuitous and ridiculous stories about the victims. Other than that, I would welcome a novel about the Zodiac Killer, and you heard this one about the Zodiac Resurrected, The Eternal Trial. But let me know what you think. What is your response to the challenge question? Do you think that writing fiction involving science fiction and the paranormal about the Zodiac Killer is acceptable? Okay, now, there's a very clear reason why I chose to talk about the poetry book and the novel before the next segment. Now, I told you guys that I would share the most far-out Zodiac Killer video that I have ever seen, And this is from the channel Noir and Order, not Law and Order, but Noir and Order, and it's called They Lied About the Zodiac Killer. At first, it started out like any ordinary Zodiac Killer video, but then it turned into something rather bizarre. They're talking about the case, then they talk about the suspects. Oh yeah, some people think that the Zodiac Killer was Arthur Leigh Allen, but there's also a theory out there that some people think the Zodiac was the Unabomber. And I was prepared to talk about this video on Zodiac Monday, but I thought that it was going to be something along the lines of, oh, well, they said that the Unabomber couldn't be the Zodiac because he had alibis for the dates of Zodiac activity. And I would only dispute that by saying, I think the interpretation of the evidence from people who claim that the Zodiac was the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, is that Kaczynski's whereabouts in 1969 are mostly unaccounted for, because as I understand, it's detailed in the books Exposed by Mark Hewitt and The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Oswell, that Kaczynski went to Canada in the summer of 1969 to look at land that he was considering buying along with his brother. And then he could have driven down from Canada, committed, let's say, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, gone back to the Midwest where he was originally based, and then gone back to the Bay Area because of his Bay Area connections at Berkeley, California, and then committed the Stein murder. He would be moving around the country, or countries plural, moving around the continent for 1969. So it's not that he has alibis, it's that his whereabouts are unconfirmed and in motion for the summer of 1969. That's what I thought I was just going to say, and that would be my only takeaway. We'd do a small Zodiac Unabomber segment, but that's not what happened. I'm just going to play the clip, and then I will respond. But I'll give you the condition that this is the most far-out Zodiac Killer video that I have ever watched.
Almost all of the Zodiac crimes, and he was really never considered a serious suspect. Some even believed that the Zodiac was a satanic cult, not a single person. They pointed to the cryptic symbology in the ciphers and the taunting language as signs of ritualistic or esoteric intent, but no physical evidence ever linked the crimes to a group effort, and the MO was relatively consistent with a lone killer. But this is my favorite. Some believed that the Zodiac was film director Stanley Kubrick. Yeah, seriously. It hinged on the idea that Kubrick was so disturbed by what he had uncovered during the making of Eyes Wide Shut, which allegedly exposed secret societies, that he embedded clues into his films and wrote the Zodiac letters as a side project to mock law enforcement and public hysteria. 100% fringe, there's no evidence, and total speculation. Some have even speculated that the Zodiac was actually a woman, though all known witness descriptions pointed to a man. Some believe it could have been a woman because it could have been a school teacher or a nurse who had access to police radio insider knowledge and wanted to deflect suspicion. But interesting, it's far-fetched, especially considering that the physical evidence and eyewitness accounts never pointed to a woman. And I've even read this, that the Zodiac was a time traveler or alien because of his apparent vanishing act and cryptic otherworldly communication style. They've proposed that the Zodiac may have been non-human, interdimensional, even a time traveler experimenting with human behavior. But of course, zero evidence supports this. Some have even believed that the Zodiac was a CIA or MK Ultra experiment, right? That the Zodiac killings were part of mind control operations run by the US government, with the killer either being a programmed assassin or someone acting out under the influence of LSD experiments gone wrong. This, of course, lends itself to all the paranoia, right? And all the distrust, but there's actual no linkage, none whatsoever, between MK Ultra documents, CIA. And then, of course, there are the theorists that believe that Zodiac was the son of a prominent politician or celebrity. There have been a handful of authors and podcasters who have actually speculated that he was shielded by powerful connections, either because he was a child of, somebody famous, but all of these theories rely on circumstantial, quote, evidence, loose timelines, handwriting comparisons. Nothing holds up under scrutiny. And then, of course, There's the ultimate, that the Zodiac never existed at all, that he was a hoax created by the media. Yeah. Try to run that one by the victims. Some argue that only a few of the murders were real. I'm sure that the victims would disagree. And the rest, including the letters, were sensationalist fabrications by journalists or, quote, letter writers not connected to the actual crimes. I mean, there's actually forensic linkage between the letters and real murder scenes, like Paul Stein's blood-soaked shirt being mailed to the Chronicle. What we do know for sure is that the Zodiac had no clear victim type, which is sort of unusual for a serial killer. He had no consistent MO either, and no geographic pattern. And one of the problems with solving the Zodiac case is that the police departments operated in silos. I mean, they had Vallejo PD, didn't share files with San Francisco PD. Forensics were limited at the time. There was no nationwide DNA database. And the Zodiac himself evolved, as many serial killers do. He read the headlines, he stayed ahead, he wrote to us, he mocked us, he told us exactly what he wanted, and we let him disappear. Every story we tell once belonged to someone who never got to finish theirs, and we remember them because crime stands still.
And one more time, that was from the channel Noir and Order. They lied to us about the Zodiac Killer. Well, they may have lied to you about the Zodiac Killer, but all you did was send us a bunch of BS. I don't think I've heard more ridiculousness jam-packed into a single 4-minute audio clip than from that video right there. And I'm not even joking, because what I talked to you about before, that the preceding material was shared for a reason, a poetry book involving the Zodiac, as well as a novel that was written about the Zodiac Killer. Those people are being honest. It's poetry. It's a novel. This video is trying to share this stuff as genuine true crime material, real true crime theories that need to be taken seriously. Oh yeah, by the way, did you know that Stanley Kubrick was the Zodiac? And let's be clear. They accused Stanley Kubrick of writing the letters because of the experiences that he had with the movie Eyes Wide Shut, and that it prompted him to start rebelling against the secret, occult nature of Hollywood. I mean, that's what it said in the video clip. Goodness, people. Eyes Wide Shut came out in 1999. That was Stanley Kubrick's final film. We're talking 30 years after the Zodiac. And to be fair, I think I know what they meant. I think they meant that Stanley Kubrick would have made the movie Eyes Wide Shut because he spent his whole career dealing with the occult rituals of Hollywood. Oh, now it's his chance to satirize them. That's what they probably meant, but it didn't come across that way from watching that. And furthermore, did Stanley Kubrick really write the Zodiac letters? I mean, put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to claim that Noir and Order, prove it. You said that was your favorite theory. All right, go for it. Prove that Stanley Kubrick wrote the Zodiac letters. I mean, but then you heard a bunch of stuff about paranormal things and the stuff about the Zodiac being a time traveler. If I understand, they ripped off a movie called Time After Time, which talks about Jack the Ripper stealing a time machine. And that's really what I think the creators of that video did. They took the Time After Time storyline and then they just substituted the Zodiac into that. And I also think that they misrepresented what the hoax theory was. And this is something that I perhaps don't even need to bring up, but it's that the Zodiac Killer hoax theory is not the idea that there were no murders. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of the word hoax. And as one person said, it should be called the Zodiac Killer fraud theory rather than the hoax theory, because the hoax theory is not that there were no murders and someone made this up. Somebody at the newspaper made this up. Real murders happened, but someone took credit for them via the letters and made people think that these unrelated murders were committed by a serial killer. I really mean that. I don't think I've heard more ridiculousness in a single clip than that thing there from Noir and Order. And out of all the people in the world to drag into this, you're going to choose Stanley Kubrick, who made some absolutely amazing films. I truly believe this about Stanley Kubrick. He was a cinematic genius. He was a genius of the film industry, a brilliant person, brilliant filmmaker. Sometimes maybe he would really expand upon things, and I heard he was an extremely tough director to work with. In Eyes Wide Shut that I mentioned, he made Tom Cruise enter a doorway 52 times once. I don't know, maybe he was just revealing secret rituals of the elites. He was using the Zodiac Killer letters to reveal the secret rituals of the Zodiac elites. Now, how exactly does this Stanley Kubrick theory work? Okay, so, he's working on movies. Yeah, in 1969, he's frustrated that he has to participate in occult rituals. I'm just going to write letters pretending to be a serial killer? Is that it? Is that it? Did I understand the message of that? And you know what? I'm also going to confess that I was the Zodiac in the movie Eyes Wide Shut. Except he doesn't confess that he was the Zodiac in the movie Eyes Wide Shut. One of the reasons why I love that film is because it totally surprised me. When I would watch the previews for it, like back in the 90s as a kid, when they would put a preview for that movie on during every commercial break, it actually looked like a movie that was just about a husband and wife, like, having some type of steamy love affair going on, and they would be cheating on each other. That's the way the previews made it look. I was completely caught off guard when I watched it because, again, all of the stuff about secret societies and rituals that are performed by the elites behind closed doors. Okay, you want to talk about that? Sure, let's talk about that in a different episode. But the Zodiac Killer and Stanley Kubrick wrote the Zodiac letters? No, sorry. You guys know where to write the show. You also know about the Facebook page, Black Box Online Radio, blackboxonlineradio on Instagram. What a way to play us out. And for now, goodbye.